Michael Gove will announce the government's revised definition of what it considers to be extremism in a bid to catch groups who, according to proposals, undermine the UK system of liberal democracy.
But there is criticism, that the new definition will be so broad that it risks being divisive, create tension and could actually end up being challenged in court, apart from the fact it doesn't hit what it needs to hit.
Well, former Head of Counter Terrorism at the Ministry of Defence.
She's excited.
Major General Chapman, my favourite, joins us. And now you advised on the counter-extremism strategy in 2015, Chip. Do you think that this definition actually needed to be updated?
Well, the object of both the 2015 and the one today is to protect from a broader set of harms beyond terrorism, including hate crime. So the ultimate aim is to stamp out religious hatred and prejudice, and you should be able to do that without a definition. Now, this talks about things about how extremism is evidenced in behaviours. If you've got things evidenced in behaviours, that would become a crime. And there are lots of ways that you can legally prosecute people for crime. So, for example, we've got the Racist and Religious Hatred Act 2006. We've got, if you support Hamas, they are a prescribed organisation, and prescription, of course, here is different from the extremism definition. If you are hostile and prejudiced to another group, be it either Islam or an anti-Semite, you have the Crime and Disorder Act 1988. So I'm not sure the definition by itself helps anyone. I think it is true that free speech is something that people take as an end. It is not. The free speech is actually a means to provide a wise public that can take part in debate. We're rather losing that with free speech. Now, we often talk about the ECHR being something that the Brits want to get rid of, but ECHR Article 10 on free speech is actually pretty good on this. Everyone has the right to freedom of expression, but the exercise of that carries duties and responsibilities that may be subject to formalities, conditions, restrictions or penalties prescribed by law or that needed for safety, national security, prevention of order, disorder or crime. So I don't really think we necessarily need a definition. There's a problem in how you define an ideology, how you define intolerance, and how, therefore, one puts people on this sort of list that they're going to have, and who decides how high the bar is.
Help me out, Chip, because you've done this, and you would be far further down the line than me. I asked an hour ago, and I want to ask it to you, because you make perfect sense to us, which was why we love having you on. Free speech, the epicentre of what we are as a nation, right? But to me, unless I'm wrong, increasingly we see on our streets people who want to protest, absolutely their right? Their movements, their marches, we see it every week, not going to be told that doesn't happen, being hijacked by extremists, right? Now, you are saying that there are laws in place. So 2 questions. Why then, if those laws are on the statute book, are the police in this country not doing more? Because this isn't going to go away. And I used an example last hour, and we were talking about it privately. We saw a Palestinian march, and I'm sure the majority of people on that march want an end to that humanitarian crisis. But we also saw fanatics with flags and hassle. And we saw one man with a Hamas is terrorist thingy, and he was bundled to the floor by 5 police. Now, you would understand people going, there's a discrepancy there. So is it the police who are not looking at the statute book? Are the police making this decision? Who is responsible for the fact that there is an increase of hate crime? I mean, it's true on our streets. So what do we do?
Well, firstly, the drivers for hate crimes, of course, include these geopolitical flare-ups. And what's unusual here is that the Israel-Gaza flare-up has been going on for now something like 160 days. Normally, they're very short. So that is one of the things that inflames this, along with sort of xenophobia and racism. Now, of course, if you've got very large crowds, how you police those crowds is up to the police. But with the modern CCTV, etc., it is often better to take retrospective action if there is a large crowd which may outmaneuver you or outnumber you, than inflame a situation in terms of a march at the time. Now, in terms of the specific that you mentioned there, Jeremy, it wasn't the fact that that guy had a flag which was the issue. It was the fact that he was originally arrested for a assault. He was then de-arrested. So that came out from the Met Police. So we have to be careful that we're ourselves not being ideological in using our examples
But
as
you see
well.
how those optics looked, and I absolutely take what you're saying. What I'm trying to say to you is there a case that the police need to be guided or made to act in a more unified way? Or is who is that down to? Is it down to Sir Mark Rowley in London? Is it down to Sadiq Khan? Is it down to the Prime Minister? Who's it down to?
Well, the law is the law. How you interpret the law and enforce the law is that up to the people on the ground. Now, one of the things you could have is, for example, is you could have a checklist for every policeman who goes out to one of these protests, saying, here's the left and right of all the laws that are applicable. And if you see something doing this, and people stepping out of line, you can arrest them. Now, one of the things about the police, of course, is that the prime function of the police is preservation of life and safety, public safety. So they have to take all those things in a macro sense into consideration, along with the micro things of what are going on the ground at the time.
And Chip, this guidance that's come out overnight is statutory guidance. It's for the government to implement within their own ranks. So are you aware of any groups that the government did have connections to or were funding yesterday that, according to this new guidance, today they could no longer be funding?
Well, I could name some, but I don't think that would probably be appropriate. And that is the problem about who decides what is ideological. There are various groups that I would term to be fairly strong Islamist groups who would be on that list of extremism. Now, I assume that they would say that that would be Islamophobic and they would fight that in a judicial review. One of the things we've seen within this in the last few weeks is that we throw this thing about Islamophobia around and Islamists around without anyone actually defining what Islamists are. Now, I can define Islamism pretty well for you if I needed to, but that's one of the problems. Where is the bar set? Who decides what is hatred and who is intolerant? Because they're not words which are actually defined in law in a way which is credible to everyone to look at.
Thank you, my friend. Really interesting, Chip. Do you think, what would you say to people, I mean, about this definition? Would you say that, I mean, doing this in the last hour or so, it's confusing. It seems to be a definition. It doesn't seem to be a set of rules. It appears to me, at the risk of sounding slightly light on this, that this is just, are they politicising this issue, do you think, nearer to an election, just coming out with a definition? Should they be stronger?
Well, to be stronger would probably get rid of more of your rights. I think one of the problems, of course, is that the sort of shared well between the Abrahamic religions, you know, the Jews, the Christians, and Islam, has been fractured. So if at the best of religion and the worst of religion, the best of religion is love and tolerance, the worst of religion is hate and bigotry. And we're seeing that hate and bigotry, and there are laws, as I've said, which deal with the actions of people that hate and bigotry. One of the things this thing said is how extremism is evidenced in behaviours. Now, if you evidence something in behaviours, you actually do something. If that goes into the criminal sphere, then you can be arrested for that. What we've got to be very careful about is how you police thought speech or message crimes. Now, for example, on the wild west of the internet, for example, we've had what are called floating hashtags in the last few months, you know, with including death to Jews, Hitler was right, kill Muslims. I mean, all that to me is evidence of extremism. And the people who post that sort of stuff can be held to account for those sorts of things. And indeed, the wild west of the internet can be ameliorated by what are the social or societal norms of commercial companies. They can regulate that in the same way that the government can regulate legal aspects to ensure that if people do something which is above a bar in terms of behaviours, they can be prosecuted.
Would this encompass individuals as well as groups in terms of who the government can have interactions with? So say, for example, the comments made by Frank Hester that have come to light, well, certainly come more to the public attention in the past few days, talking about black women and talking about Diane Abbott being shot, wanting her to be shot. Do you think that that kind of language, that kind of ideology would be encompassed in this government guidance?
Well, I think it is, yeah. I mean, you know, that is racist as far as I can see. I mean, individuals can be held to account. We've seen this, for example, in the last few years with Amjad Chowdhury, for example, the Al Mujahiroon guy, who's really been taken off the public sphere by the things he said, which were proselytizing in the sort of terror sphere. That's one of the things also I don't like about the definition, is it does talk about an ideology based on violence. Well, if you've got an ideology based on violence, that is part of the Terrorism 2000 Act, because violence in that sense includes both political, religious, ideological or racial aspects. So that would tie back to the comments from the chap earlier this week.
So therefore it could be interpreted that if Frank Hester and his comments fall underneath this new guidance, the government could actually have to return that £10 million because they then therefore would be interacting with and receiving money from somebody who, according to their own definition, might be an extremist.
Yeah, and that's part of the problem of having a definition. So give you other examples where who's an extremist or who's not an extremist. So, for example, it's not as evident in this country, but, you know, the pro-abortion, anti-abortion aspects of that, fox hunting, anti-fox hunting, you know, these are all difficult issues which a definition doesn't necessarily help you with in the long term.
Well, I'll tell you what did help you, because you make perfect sense, and she just sits here and just grins, so you can come on whenever, because she never looks happy unless you're here.
Thank you so much, Major General Chip Chapman.